I'm gonna kill her. And this is Mental Fitness Friday. I'm Larry McInnes, and if ever there was a negative and sabotaging mindset, murder has got to be in the top five, right? Let me give you some backstory. In one of my earlier jobs, years and years ago, I was working in this relatively new industry called computer aided graphic design. So now it's just called graphic design. I worked in this small shop. It was just me and my boss. I loved the work, and I was able to put up with my boss's demand for excellence. Over time, though, it was becoming clear to me that her ultra perfectionism and need to control everything was creating this toxic work environment. That she would micromanage every detail of my projects, um, criticize me and my work, and never gave me any positive feedback or recognition. She would also blame me for any mistakes or delays, even if they weren't my fault. And she was constantly stressed, constantly angry, and constantly unhappy. So was I. So this fed into my angry victim mentality to such extremes that I was planning her murder. So she had this in her office. She had this big window up on the third floor overlooking some woods. I would look at her, look at the window, look at her, look at the window, and I'd think, yeah, that should do it. So in the years since then, feelings of hate and disgust and anger and revenge continued to bubble up to the surface long after I left that job. And whenever I thought of her or heard her name, I would feel this surge of negative emotions. Whenever I encountered anyone who reminded me of her or behaved like her, I would feel triggered and defensive. And whenever I faced a similar situation of criticism or pressure, I would feel anxious and resentful. So these feelings were affecting my self esteem, my relationships, and obviously my mental well being. They are holding me back from living a happy and fulfilling life. Now, I know that those feelings were generated by my own saboteurs. And I now know that my boss's saboteurs triggered my own, which then reinforced her saboteurs into this vicious cycle. I also now know that the sage power of empathy can be used to break that cycle and heal the emotional wounds that the saboteurs inflict on us and on others. Empathy is the ability to understand and share feelings of another person. It's not the same as sympathy, which is more like feeling sorry for someone or pitying them. Empathy is feeling with someone, not for someone. So, empathy allows us to connect with others on a deeper level and see things from their perspective and to appreciate their humanity. Empathy also helps us regulate our own emotions to reduce stress and conflict, and to increase compassion and kindness. So empathy is one of the five powers of the sage, the inner wise one that can access our full potential and positive emotions. And to remind you, the other four powers are exploration, innovation, navigation, and activation. The sage powers are the antidotes to the saboteurs that hijack our mind with the negative emotions and limiting beliefs. And just as a reminder, the saboteurs are led by the judge, which we all have, and which constantly criticizes ourselves, others, and our situations. So the judge gathers up his accomplices: the controller, the hyperachiever, the restless, the stickler, the pleaser, the hypervigilant, the avoider, the victim, and the hyper-rational. Now, these saboteurs are not our true selves. They are neural networks that have evolved in humans in order to keep us alive. And for most of human history, those neural networks served us pretty well. But they've outlived their usefulness and now sabotage our happiness and success. So the saboteurs are not only harmful to ourselves, but also to others. They create tension and conflict in our relationships by making us, for example, judge others harshly or unfairly, acting selfishly or aggressively, or by making us blame and resent others. So tension in a relationship is caused by saboteurs on both sides. Typically, when the other person shows up with their saboteur, that automatically triggers a saboteur in us because of mirror neurons and saboteur contagion. We might feel upset or irritated, which are saboteur emotions. Our saboteur reaction fuels the other person's saboteur even more, and this starts a vicious cycle rolling, which erodes the relationship. Now, you can use your sage's power of empathy to interrupt this cycle. And instead of getting upset at the other person's saboteurs, here's a different way to look at it. It might be true that the other person's saboteurs are hard on you, but just imagine how much harder those saboteurs are on the person who has to live with them inside their head. So if someone's judge is often harsh and critical of you, imagine how much more brutal that judge is toward that person all the time, and how hard it must be for that person to live with that brutal voice attacking them 24 hours a day. Or if someone's stickler stresses you with over perfectionism, imagine what it must be like to live with that stickler constantly beating them down. Or imagine how exhausting it must be for someone who's constantly feeling internally controlled and afraid to lose control. Now remember that we all have this inner wise sage as well as those saboteurs. And imagine your sage essence as being represented as your 5-year-old self. And remember that the other person also has their own 5-year-old sage essence. So it might help you even to feel even more empathy if you imagine all the saboteur hurt and fear inflicted on that beautiful child inside of that person. So when they're hijacked, imagine that beautiful 5-year-old in them cowering in the corner because it's just too dangerous to come out with the saboteur in charge. Now today, when you witness the other person's saboteurs, feel empathy for the sage in them, having to live with that saboteur 24 hours a day. You'll be more likely to remain in sage mode and not feel their saboteurs during hijacking, and fuel their sage instead. This will shorten their hijackings, speed up their recovery, and grow their sage over time. And it'll strengthen your relationship. Now, I never murdered my boss. Her saboteurs, especially her judge, her controller, her hyperachiever, and her stickler, created this incredibly toxic work environment. But I can now look back at that time with empathy toward her and understand that as painful as things were for me, she was suffering even more and suffering constantly. And then there's an unexpected side effect of this sage power of empathy. So even though I hadn't seen my old boss in decades, my own saboteurs used my memories to hold my hand on that hot mental stove. With the sage power of empathy, my own saboteurs can no longer generate those feelings of hate and disgust and anger and revenge. And I tell you, it is very freeing. So empathy is not only good for others, but it's also good for ourselves. Empathy is not only a way of relating, but it's also a way of healing. It's not only a power of the sage, but it also provides a gift and opportunity to heal a relationship. I hope this strikes a chord with you. Put the questions and comments in the chat, and feel free to DM me. I will see you next week at this time on Mental Fitness Fridays.